The opinions expressed in this interview are solely those of the presenter and not necessarily those of Takeda. Takeda does not guarantee the accuracy or reliability of the information provided therein.
All right, BloodStream audience, today we're sitting down with a mother and daughter whose lives have been shaped by hemophilia, love, loss, resilience, and the ever-evolving promise of medical innovation. From a small college in Pennsylvania in the early 1980s to the height of the AIDS crisis to the modern-day journey of raising a child with severe hemophilia A and an inhibitor, the family's story spans generations of pain, courage, and hope. What began with a young couple in love and a beer fridge full of Factor has grown into a legacy of strength and care that now lives on in Robbie, a child facing hemophilia with the support of a grandmother who has seen it all, a mother who carries forward the lessons and the love of the past. We're honored to welcome Nancy Rogers and Kayla Klein to BloodStream to share with us today. Nancy, Kayla, thanks for being here.
Hey,
Hello,
having
thank
us.
you.
Well, if we could, Nancy, I'll jump right in with you. So, can you take us back to a challenging moment, the moment when you first learned about your husband's diagnosis of AIDS while you are pregnant? What do you remember most about that time looking back?
Yeah, so this is what I remember, and I was hoping that I could remember all the bits and pieces. It's been a long time. We got married in 1982, and about a year and a half after that, I had a first pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage. Shortly after that, about 6 months later, I got pregnant again. And at 5 months pregnant with Kayla, we met with the hemophilia team, and I thought we were meeting about hemophilia. And they said, oh, that's when AIDS started to come around. So that would have been early 85, right? And you probably shouldn't be pregnant. But um, since you are, we're going to tell you now that you probably shouldn't have intercourse. I'm going to be real blunt. You can edit out what you want.
Go for it.
That there are some risks, right? But and we were questioning, well, does he have AIDS? Doesn't he have AIDS? And at the time, they wouldn't confirm AIDS until you had a opportunistic infection.
Hmm.
And we knew at 5 months pregnant with her that he tested positive. And they actually, if I can recall it correctly, they knew which batch of Factor he got it from, but they downplayed it all. Now, 1985, AIDS rapidly, it just went kaboom, right? I want to take us back a little bit further from that because there's something
Sure.
I forgot. Before I even got pregnant with Kayla, they were doing a study, and they had asked sexual partners to come in, just to have a checkup. And I kept saying to David, why would they check me for hemophilia? I don't carry hemophilia. There's no hemophilia in my family. There was no mention of AIDS at that time. And I remember distinctly them feeling my lymph nodes.
Hmm.
I'm going to hold on to that because feeling my lymph nodes became an obsession with me, and once I had her. So that started. So I'm pregnant with Kayla. I'm teaching school. David was not sick at the time. He would have bleeds, but what they would say is, we don't know what it means to test positive for AIDS. We don't know what it means. We know you shouldn't be having intercourse or unprotected intercourse, but other than that, he seems healthy. So about when I was 7 months pregnant, 6, 7, he started losing weight. He wasn't a big guy to begin with. His heaviest was 135. And he had lost weight. He had lost weight. He had night sweats. And I became obsessed with the list that the hemophilia group had sent out to us of things to look for. And I knew he had every one of them. I'm getting choked up. I'm sorry.
No, not a problem at all. Let's give you a break. Let's give you a moment. This is a big topic. Let's go to you, Kayla, for a second. Growing up, it sounds like AIDS was not really openly discussed to shield and protect you. I'm curious to know, as you look back on all of that, how do you reflect on what you did and did not know about your dad's health and the health of your family as a child?
I think, I've shared this with you as well. It's interesting. I grew up in like the most loving, happy family, and I thought everyone had three sets of grandparents, and I thought everyone had an aunt who took care of them as a second mother. Like, I just thought it was one big family and everyone, it was really normal. And it wasn't until I was probably in like middle school or high school that I started to be like, all right, so what happened? Like my dad had hemophilia, but I never knew the specifics of it. And it actually wasn't until college. Do you remember when I did my thesis on AIDS related stigmas? And that's when I actually got the full story in it. And I can appreciate not wanting to tell me, as a young child, we have no filter and we can blurt out with that, whatever, and we can share how we feel. And I could see my mom's anxiety around like not wanting to share that with me. So I didn't come home from school one day saying like, oh, by the way, I told, Sally Joe about Daddy David's
Well,
hemophilia and AIDS. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I'll get to the mostly the why of that. Um, so anyhow, I knew he had symptoms, but no one would confirm to me. No one would say, yeah, it's not looking good. Like nobody. So we get to where she's due, and David has a bleed, a hip bleed, and he was in bad shape. But I thought also it was AIDS, right? He had the
Mm.
symptoms. So he couldn't come with me when I first went into labor. My sister went. But then he came in and they had a special stool for him and he was able to see the birth and everything and be there. And I remember being obsessed about him eating and when because I figured if he ate and he gained weight, that would mean I was wrong about AIDS. But nobody taught, the professionals did not talk about it. Nurses would come in and go, they took cord blood from Kayla to test her at birth, and they took blood from me. But it was a week before you'd get results, right? So the nurses would come in and go, hey, did you get those results yet? And they didn't come in very much. My doctor was amazing, amazing. In fact, I heard him yell at the nurses and team because people were afraid. They were afraid to come into the room. They were afraid to be around. There was a lot of blood involved, right? And they didn't know about Kayla and I. We didn't know yet. So a week passed, but David was in bad shape and full-blown AIDS was diagnosed exactly 2 months later. He went to work one day. It was Halloween of 85. She was born August 29th of 85. And he called his dad to come and get him and to take him immediately to the hospital to see Dr. Ragney. And he didn't come home. He had pneumocystis by then. So that's the timeline. I just want to piggyback a little bit and we'll get to it, I'm sure. It wasn't not talked about because of embarrassment or anything like that. People knew, and people came out of the woodwork to support us, but also there were people who were afraid of us once it was known our family what was going on with David. When David passed and life moved on and I got remarried and we moved to Hampton, it was still the 90s, right? And there was still a lot of stigma around AIDS. And I didn't want Kayla and friends. I wanted her to have friends.
Right. Of course.
Hmm.
Of course. What did you learn about stigma, Kayla, working on that paper in college? And then I'd be curious to hear about the conversation where that led to you and your mom more openly talking about what actually happened.
Yeah, so I interviewed her around the AIDS, the stigma and AIDS. And again, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so it was really an interesting and very cathartic process to go through with this thesis. And I really appreciate that my professor let me do it. But there were different groups that were stigmatized during the AIDS crisis, and and from my mom, her interviews and that I would have with her, and I think we still have this tape somewhere, is it was really the gay community that had reached out to you, right? And I
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and then there was, my favorite is, we had this cat growing up named Uno. And didn't someone drop it off from, was it from church or from
It was the
someone?
wife. I worked in a Catholic school I had nuns all around me that loved me. And the priests at the church didn't really come around so much, but the Episcopal ministers seemed to adopt us. Like once it was known in the community, we didn't keep it a secret. Like, hey, that would have been way too hard at that time to keep it under wraps. But so this minister and his wife kind of adopted us, and they brought us a cat because we needed a cat at that time. I don't know.
That was like our
But
beloved.
anyhow, that
Yeah. So it's interesting how, these stories and these different, these different stigmatized groups, and how, and again, I'm sure there's other stories, but I think in our experience, or my mom's experience, yes, we were stigmatized, but not in a way. We also found a lot, or my mom found a lot
yes,
of support and community, and
yeah,
maybe places where you wouldn't necessarily find it or turn to it, and then places that you would think, like your church or whatever, maybe would be
yeah.
more welcoming. And so it's interesting, right? What I
There was a
remember.
lot. Yeah, there
What
was
do
a
you say?
lot of fear. A lot. 1985. It was, a lot that was unknown. You were living day to day. No, you didn't have the internet, right? You didn't have any. So you just waited for that 6 o'clock news for Dr. Fauci to come on, or the main doctor that was in San Francisco. I lived where, to see those people on and to hear more. And you could tell at the hemophilia center that staff was just, and the infectious disease people, they just didn't know. They were just day to day too.
It's notable to me that David was one of the first men in Western PA with
Hmm.
hemophilia to pass from AIDS.
Hmm.
What's significant about that?
I think he was one of the earliest to get it. And so there was, for he and for I, there was no other couple that we knew of that was in our situation that you could learn from. They did put me in touch with a woman whose husband had died before David, but they didn't have children. Like, we had a child. I was HIV negative. Kayla was HIV negative. Like, no, there was no support group. And in fact, the therapist that I began talking to was the therapist for the gay community. Like they didn't even have there was nobody. They were just kind of out there. And so for David, honestly, by the time that full diagnosis came, he was just so entrenched he was in a lot of pain, he was so sick. And I don't know if Kayla told you, he also became a paraplegic
I'd say that. Yeah.
because when they went in to do the spinal tap to see if he had the meningitis that AIDS patients got, they didn't give him his factor, and so he bled into the spinal cord. And so I was looking for someone to talk to go like, hey, how did you navigate this? But he was just trying to live as long as he could.
Wow. Kayla, I think in something that you had written to me, there was a note about your dad's outlook and the gratitude that he had for what Factor did enable. And the way I interpret it was he had an ability to distance from the unfortunate, unforeseen, unintended consequence of pathogens and had an appreciation for, at least at its core, this thing enabled my life in ways that if I was born 10 years prior, everything would have been different. I'm paraphrasing and putting that in my own words. I'd love for you to speak to your dad's outlook.
Yeah, I've always asked my mom this, and because if you're looking at, innovation and what innovation has brought us, and, even with Robbie, fast forward, what innovation has changed for our family. And I think that's how it came up, because we never really talked about it. But, mom even said, when your dad was on Factor, and again, I'm paraphrasing now, but it gave him a life that like none of us ever thought possible. Like I even never thought Robbie would even be able to play any of the sports that he does, or be able to live the life that he does, given what it looked like 8, 10 years ago, 5 years ago with him. And I think that was when we connected on that. You're like, oh, your father, he was so grateful for the innovation, because it gave him a life that like he never, growing up, never thought was possible.
I actually asked him that when he was very ill. I said, are you sorry that you ever took the factor? You ever used factor? He said, no. I said, given that we know what was happening, he said, no. I didn't know him before factor, right? I knew him in college as a guy in a fraternity. That's how I met him. And he was like president of his fraternity and just a nice, fun guy, and running around campus. He walked with a limp. I only knew him after Factor, but I think prior to that, and he had a lot of friends on campus. He was just this really nice guy. And I think prior to that, his high school, his junior, I think that he must have been out of school a lot, missed a lot of school. And so I'm sure he had friends, but I don't know of any high school friends. I never met any high school friends, but tons of college friends.
Well, I can relate in so much as I had an inhibitor growing up, and it
Hmm.
meant I missed a lot of school. I wasn't in a lot of activities. I didn't have consistent friendships. And then when I overcame the inhibitor and kind of like Robbie had my own before after moment,
Yeah.
life changed dramatically. Medical innovation
Mhm.
enabled me in high school, then college, and
Yeah.
thereafter to live a much different life than I ever thought possible. But Nancy, for you, to hear about life before factor and to witness it after for David. And again, putting
Mhm.
aside the unfortunate catastrophic reality, but it must have been, I don't know, you tell me, watching Robbie grow up with an inhibitor and then watching medical innovation enable his life in a way unlike ever thought before, just as Kayla described. What was that like for you?
For me or for Kayla?
You, no, for Nancy.
So, yeah, for me, well, when when we found out about Robbie's inhibitor and when he had that hip bleed, I actually was crawling in bed with him at the hospital, and that was
Oh,
a really hard
God.
moment for me.
Oh my God.
I mean,
So,
he
so,
was in so much pain. So that
and that
was
was
a
like
really
5
low
years
point.
ago, probably to the day. Probably right. It
Kayla,
was
what
right
makes you emotional? What makes you emotional to recall that particular event, Kayla?
because I remember calling her and I was at work, I think. And I was like, you got to come up. And she was a principal. And so she's like, okay. And and I used to be a teacher. Like you can't just get up and leave. You can't work remote when you're a principal, or a teacher. And, I was like, you got to come up. You got to come up. And usually Joel and we've been very adamant about like doing everything ourselves, like soup to nuts, everything ourselves, port, everything. But like this, and we were impatient all the time. But
Hmm.
this one was different.
Yeah,
This one was different.
yeah.
And I think that's why I was like, you got to come. And so they laid in bed together for like weeks.
I mean, he was in the hospital bed. I would just lay by him and rub his back, but he would moan. I mean, he was in great pain. But then to see him now,
Yeah.
to understand he's this crazy athlete now, and I think like,
We all
but
kind of, but he was in a
but
wheelchair. In a wheelchair. I mean, he still has his things. Like he still was in. We were impatient. Just this fall, and things happen. But I think it was that moment. It was like, and I just remember, yeah, it's like we still the day that lives just on every March. I always
yes,
text her, and I email one of my nurse friends, and I'm like, hey, do you remember? And everyone's like, how could we forget?
Yeah.
So
and
bad.
then COVID came
And then it was COVID.
like that, and then the month later COVID. So it was kind of a crazy year, but it's amazing that the life he lives. I mean, he skates. He's crazy active.
It lights me up to hear that because,
Yeah,
again, growing up with such restriction and pain, what is now available to people at a younger age
yeah.
to be able to live a more full life, it's just that's the goal, I think, of all this work. And I want to just take a step back. We have about 5 minutes, and I want to say thank you to you both for
Thanks for having us.
just sharing so openly. And this has been really lovely. There's so many threads to the conversation that, with time and opportunity, I'd love to follow up on. But where I'm kind of landing as I'm processing everything that I've learned about your story and how much your family's multi-generational story is kind of emblematic of a lot in the greater community. I think about that need for support, Nancy, that you had when you first learned of the diagnosis. And
Hmm.
I think about what Robbie has been through, and Kayla, even that story, and like the moment of the phone call saying, I need help, I need you,
Yeah,
the
yeah, come
need
on.
for support, that changes different seasons of life, different
Yeah.
circumstances, different burdens, but the need for support never goes away. And as we think about the community right now and continued medical innovation and funding being a little different, and post COVID, to Nancy's point about crazy old COVID, our post COVID behavior patterns, and maybe we're not as keen to go to meetings anymore. And I do get a little worried that we're not necessarily going to face the next AIDS crisis in hemophilia. I think that would be overstating it. But I do get worried that we don't appreciate enough what this community enables as advocates for access, for emotional and psychological support of our peers, both ways. And I just wonder what that, as we think about Robbie and as we think about, the kids yet to be born, like, what does that bring up for each of you? Maybe Kayla first and then Nancy.
Yeah, the hemophilia community has been such an area of support for us, and as innovation continues to grow and to thrive, and thank goodness for that, right? But I think at the end of the day, we still need that connection. We still need that sense of community and belonging. And maybe things look different, and maybe folks are living a life that they never thought possible, right? Whether it be Daddy David or Robbie or, our families. But I think at the end of the day, we still yearn for that sense of being and belonging. And even like a quick, I always use this like thought partner, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or has this ever happened to you? And I too worry that, things change, but I think at the core of it, if we can still stay connected and still stay true to our roots and still think about what our community went through, 50 years ago through the AIDS crisis, like that should still be that still should be foundational. That should still be a part of us, no matter where we go with innovation. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Certainly does, and I appreciate that. Nancy, curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for me, and I think it's personal. I mean, maybe there are some people who don't need so much of a community. I know for me, having that one person, her name was Linda, whose husband had passed. Again, they didn't have children, but I didn't have to have so much explaining, or, she got me and I got her, and we we connected in ways that was my connection. For the one person who totally understood hemophilia and AIDS and being a wife and being a partner, and so I love the fact that Kayla has this community and she's really immersed herself in it. Robbie, I think he I mean, he talks about hemophilia with Kayla, and and he goes to camp every year, and he is very open about it, and he has lots of friends. So he's found his community, I think, and I think Kayla's found hers, and I'm happy for that. But yeah, it was very isolating as far as hemophilia went and as far as AIDS went, because I kept that under wraps when David passed. Interestingly enough, the psychologist that I saw that also worked with the gay community was the ex-husband of a teacher that I began working with. I worked at a new school, but she didn't know me, but I knew her. And I knew all of that. So I didn't have a community. I only had that one person, that Linda, but that was enough for me.
I think that's such an important point because as you first made the point about Linda, I thought, even asking the question, community can feel like such an overwhelming or oversized thing. It doesn't mean that you have to know everybody's first, middle, and last name that has a bleeding disorder. Linda was your community. You
She
had
was.
what you needed at that time. And the way you even just spoke through, like, Robbie has his people and he talks with Kayla about hemophilia and he's busy and he's got social network and support. He has his community too. So every individual's community is different, and sometimes it is just a relationship to one
Yep.
other individual that
yep.
makes
Yep.
all the difference. So I'm glad you made that point clear. And again, I appreciate that you were willing to come on and chat with us. I feel like we only skimmed the surface in these 30 minutes, but I think that's a good sign and gives us plenty more that we can talk about in the future. So Nancy
I
and Kayla,
appreciate
thanks for
I
sharing your
appreciate my
family
mom
story.
sharing it. She's never shared it really. And so we were, with us. But I'm like, it's a story to be told. And so thanks,
You're a
Mom.
And
natural storyteller.
both the girls tell me that, and I just, not that I don't want to share it. It's fine. I just, I don't know who would find it interesting. I
I
just think
wouldn't.
my life is normal.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that as an open invitation to
There you
ask
go.
you back when I have more
Yeah,
questions. Is that a deal?
Do
yeah.
it.
All right.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank
Deal.
Well, it
you
was
guys.
nice meeting you.
You as well. Thank you so much.